All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our conversation with 30 Talks Weird Love author Alessandra Narváez Varela, done in celebration of this year's Global Read Aloud. Lee and Low Books is so excited that 30 Talks Weird Love has been chosen as this year's young adult pick. If you are unfamiliar with the Global Read Aloud, it is an annual event where educators read aloud the year's chosen books to their students during a set 6-week period. And during that time, they make as many global connections as possible. More information about the Global Read Aloud can be found at theglobalreadaloud.com. My name is Michelle Fuentes. My pronouns are she, her, ella. I'm the literacy specialist here at Lee and Low Books, and I'm a first-generation Mexican American, born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, all over the South, really. I'm a former ESL educator, and at Lee and Low Books, I lead district-wide workshops and create student-centered resources. I'm a Mexican American woman with curly brown hair and brown eyes. I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a blue and white pinstripe top. Alessandra Narváez Varela was born and raised in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. She earned a BS in biology and a bilingual MFA in creative writing from the University of Texas at El Paso, where she now teaches. 30 Talks Weird Love is her debut novel. She lives in El Paso, Texas. Thank you so much for chatting today with me, Alessandra.
Hello, Enola. Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm honored to be here. I'm a Mexican American woman with light skin, blue eyes, and long brown hair. I'm wearing a sleeveless shirt with a colorful tie.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. 30 Talks Weird Love is a powerful novel told in verse. It follows Ana Maria, a 13-year-old girl growing up in Mexico, when she is visited by her 30-year-old future self. With a classic coming-of-age themes and a speculative twist, 30 Talks Weird Love will resonate with young readers and adults alike with its discussion of mental health, family relationships, and Mexico's femicides. The book received 2-starred reviews from Booklist and the School Library Journal. Newbery Honor-winning author Jasmine Warga loved it, saying, "In bold and gorgeous verse, Varela crafts a deeply moving and evocative story that grapples unflinchingly with issues of mental health. This is a book our young people need. Alessandra Narváez Varela is a fresh new voice, and I can't wait to see what she writes next." Alessandra, let's start with Ana Maria's story and how it came to be. What inspired the book, and what were some of the things you were thinking about during the writing process?
I think that the main inspiration for Ana Maria came from my students at Anthony High School. While I was completing my master's in creative writing at UTEP, I was also working as a tutor of English, chemistry, math, whatever. Working with that kind of student, it just made me think about my own teenagehood, my own experiences growing up in Ciudad Juarez. It made me think about my family as well. And that's where it really took off. That's where the seed was planted in my mind, because working with teenagers was really, really cool, really strange at the same time, surreal. But that's the inspiration, my students.
Yeah, no, as a former educator of 8th graders that consider themselves teenagers, basically, at that point, I can definitely resonate with just how important that time is for students. And it's amazing to hear that you were able to get inspiration from that. With that, what themes are present in this book, and why did you include these themes?
I think there's several of them, but one of the main ones, first off, is mental health awareness in terms of mental illness and mental health. That one is very special to this project, because growing up, I never acknowledged that something was wrong with the way I thought or the way that I felt about myself. So I just kept at it. I was a very studious, overachieving individual, and I never took the time to think and to even ask for help. And as I said before, working with my students in the high school, this generation is very much, or I guess much more aware and willing to be open about their experiences. And they helped me realize that I needed to go back to that place so I could hopefully help someone else, another teenager, even an adult, reading the book and saying, you know what, I'm going to go back and look at myself with kindness and just remember and cherish those memories and how I survived, really. Also in Mexican American culture, I do think that there's been some progress around the discussion of mental health and mental illness, but we still, como se dice, how could I say, there's still a lot of secrecy and shame attached to it, or even the realization that this is real, that it's a real illness and that is worthy of treatment. So that is the main one, the topic that's really very present throughout. Other topics are the femicides, as you mentioned in the synopsis of the book. Being from Ciudad Juarez, there are many things that people think about, right? One of them being the killing, the disappearance of girls and women. And so I really wanted to come from that Juarense realm, meaning a native from Juarez, and say, this is how I grew up with that experience, even though I was lucky to not be affected directly. Just because I am a Juarense, I'm a woman from Ciudad Juarez, I have that responsibility, I think, in a way. And also to, I don't know, expand the narrative around that. It's one of the most difficult topics that are, I think, addressed in the book as well, because unfortunately the femicides are still continuing. This is not a thing of the past. The other one is girlhood and what it means to be a girl. And of course, the beauty of girlhood is that it can take many shapes, flavors, blah, blah, blah. But what it meant for me to grow up as a girl, and also what it meant for Ana Maria to grow up as a girl and have friends that were girls, because those relationships are so intense, so complex. It's just a lot of mind games being played, and I just wanted to explore that, and not only mind games, but a lot of love.
Everything that you said was what I picked up on when I was reading, especially the womanhood. I think, particularly during that time, I think sometimes as women and as girls in the 13-year-old range, it's not something that's as talked and explored and written about. So it was really refreshing to see that perspective of Ana Maria in the book. You touched a little bit about what it means to be a Juarense and live in Juarez. What does being Juarense mean to you? How does your experience living on the border influence your writing?
I think being a Juarense means hard work. It means resilience. Those are the key words that I like for people to think about when it comes to Ciudad Juarez, not just femicides, drug cartels, violence. We're so much more than that. And because of that, as a Juarense, I do think it's also my responsibility to go beyond those very narrow headlines and say, you know, Ciudad Juarez is a home. It's my home. And as such, it has layers. And because of that, they're worthy of exploration. So that's what it means to me. As far as being in the border, it's just such a unique place. And I know all of us say that about our hometowns, but the fact that it's bilingual, that it's bicultural, it just gives it this really different sabor, this different flavor, this different feel. Working in the university as well, where I'm able to work with students who did what I did in terms of crossing the border daily to go to school. Even that really enriches our interactions, and the fact that we can just sometimes assume that someone will understand our Spanish and maybe they'll reply in English or vice versa. It's just really surreal. And it's also going towards this bilingual utopia that I think that the book presents in terms of just speaking as many languages as is possible within a community, and that there's acceptance, that there's pride in speaking those languages. So being in the border is just, you know, we're always in constant flux because of, you know, crossing the border. But there's also a lot of tension, because I do think that we're at the mercy of the decisions of two countries, and they don't always favor us as border dwellers. And I think that because we're used to that tension, those negotiations, I think I'm not the only fronteriza or border writer who is very much affected by the experience.
Yeah, wow. Thank you so much for sharing. I mean, as a Mexican American, you know, living in the South, that's something that I've had to work against a lot, you know, being able to be comfortable speaking Spanish, and for you to feel that pride, and that almost like natural instinct to be able to do that between two cities is so beautiful. And it's something that's very unique. to this country. So thank you for sharing that. You are a poet and you wrote this book using a variety of poetic styles. Can you speak to why you included so many forms and how and when to utilize them?
Of course, and I still consider myself a poet. I think that poetry is still my first love. And even though I had the opportunity to go into novel writing, because of that training and identity, I just wanted to explore the possibility of poetry. And I will say this, my editor in the Cinco Puntos imprint, and back then it was just our very amazing local press. She was really supportive of this story being told in verse, but she really provided that balance between what I wanted to do on the page with continuing to tell a story. And when she accepted the manuscript, it was all couplets, meaning stanzas, right, that had 2 lines. All of the manuscript looked like that. And I think it had some prose poems, those that looked like paragraphs in the book. And I think that as we continued editing, I wanted to connect to that identity that I'm so proud about, but I wasn't really exploring. So, for example, some of the concrete poems, or you can call them shape poems, where the margins are determined by an image. Those came about because my editor, Lee Bird from Cinco Puntos, said this girl has to have fun, right? And I thought, what does that mean to someone who's like this obsessed student? It wouldn't mean being in a play day with her friends. And because she's a closeted poet and she doesn't really want to accept that part of herself, I just started with the very basic concept of play. And since I had written about a mama leche or a hopscotch, I just found, I think, a stock image online, copied and pasted it into Word, and then it started filling in the shape. And that's how I started adding the shape poems. And in the end, there's around 4 or 5. And I really think that they add saborcito. I keep using that word, but it adds texture. It adds a little bit of variety. That's a bilingual brain for you. Prose poems, as I said, I've always loved those, even though I don't think I've reached the zenith, and I don't think I will for a long time, because I love that marriage between what is the core poetry, which is music, but also going in that set paragraph. I just love it. Other forms that are present are blackout poems. And I think those are just very interesting to me, because you have this source text and then you just go with your Sharpie. Or in my case, I went with that tool from Word where you can just black out with the highlighter. And it really transforms the text. And I also explore that a lot in my classes at UTEP. Like, what does it mean to black out? And in a series of poems written by Ana Maria to one of her friends, Pipina, it's really interesting, for me at least, through the character, to see how the first letter is like super honest and she's revealing really private stuff or really weird stuff. And then as she continues redacting or blacking out, then it really becomes a dry message. Those are some forms that are present in the book. And I just wanted to have fun. And I wanted readers to understand that poetry, you can do a lot of experimentation. Fiction, you can absolutely do it. But with poetry, there's almost an expectation, just because as poets, we're very aware of the space, right, within a page.
No, I loved reading the Mama Leche, the hopscotch poem. It was so fun to see the personality of the character really came out, and just to continue to look forward to those poems in the book was really exciting to get to read the blackout poems. I related to it because it's like, sometimes you start off with a really long text and then you kind of just edit and put it down and I'm like, okay, this is what I want to say. So it was really fun. And I think poetry sometimes can be really daunting for students. And I think this puts it in a really fun way. And, I can't wait to be able to really just share this with everyone, because it allows you to interact with poetry and poems in a non-daunting way, in a very light and fun way. So thank you for that. What was it like writing from a 13-year-old's perspective? Obviously, the fun comes across and the ideas come across in the book, but what was that like for you?
It was fun. It was daunting. I
Yeah.
think that being a teenager, and I was reminded of this while working with students at Anthony High School in Anthony, Texas, which is a town very close to El Paso, was being reminded of feeling everything a flor de piel, so very close to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
It's living in this very intense hyperbolic reality where everything matters, from the smallest details, like I'm not wearing the right shirt today, to the bigger
Yeah.
ones, which is when students come to you and tell you what's happening at home, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, but to me, to see no variation between reacting to an outfit or to what's happening at home, it really speaks to me about that willingness to live at that really emotional peak. And I think that it requires a lot of courage to be so in
Yes.
touch with feelings, because as adults, we obviously have them. But I do think that a lot of us, at least, as we grow older, we tend to tamper them down, filter them. And there's something that is lost in the process. And even if we
Yeah.
have a trusted friend or partner, relative, where we can really let it out, it becomes something that's rare. Like, oh, I opened up to this person, but it doesn't always happen, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So being able to speak from that very emotional charged place gave me a lot of permission to feel things again. So when I was talking about the femicides, for example, even though, as I say, I did not lose a tia, an aunt, or a cousin, a friend, I still was affected because I learned what fear meant from a very young age. And even though I didn't have the words, it was gender-based fear, gender-based
Mm-hmm.
violence, where being a girl
Yeah.
equal, I don't know, being dead. And so exploring that through the voice of a 13-year-old really allowed me to be angry at that.
Mm-hmm.
It allowed me to, for example, view Ciudad Juarez in very different ways, as a home, as I said, but also a very complex place where these things are actually happening. One of the poems, I believe it's called Mother Beast, where Ana Maria really lets it out, and it's really angry at the city, right? Even though the city is not responsible for the disappearances and murders. That's a poem that didn't undergo much revision, I think, because the book needed that honesty, that anger, but also it just came from a very primal place that I hadn't allowed myself to connect to as an adult, and even as a poet who was before writing poems for adults. So, and that's overall what I really admire from the young adult canon. We really can go deep into that fear, that joy, that anger, and go for it. And I think that teenage readers, that's what they connect to, but also adults, because as I said, we're not able to do that all the time.
Yeah. As a 29-year-old adult, I resonated with so much of what Ana Maria was going through, and then the perspectives that 30 would share with her. And I found myself, dating it back to my 7-year-old self, which is who I talk to. So it's like, it was really special to be able to connect with this book. And I mean, just the impact that it has on young adults, and it will have on young adults, is truly special once again, so thank you. How does this book celebrate the wisdom of youth?
Part of it is because of what I mentioned, that willingness to
Yeah.
be so connected to your emotional self. There's a lot of wisdom that comes with that, but also a lot of honesty. They call you out really quickly if you're not being straightforward. And they can tell you're faking it. And so having that experience in real life, being a tutor, and then thinking about my reader when I was writing this, I knew that I had to go for the truth. Their wisdom comes from being able to laugh about things, the things that they come up with, the witty responses, and how quick they can be in their interactions. And I wanted to somehow reproduce that in writing, especially in the books where Ana Maria is talking to 30. I really wanted there to be that that
Sarcasm.
challenge. Yes, they're just so honest. And I keep saying that, but it allowed me to be honest with myself. So I really, really admire young readers and teenagers because of that. And that's why I love working with them as well.
Yeah, no, they're super witty, super honest. There's no filter with the youth. So we touched on some of the more difficult subject matter in the book, bullying, the pressure we sometimes put on ourselves to excel, femicides. How did you find the balance of these subjects while moving the narrative forward and keeping the teen reader in mind? And in what ways do you think poetry verse can make these tough subjects a little bit more accessible for our young readers?
The balance was I achieved it with a lot of help. I'm a first-time novelist. And so with my training, I would really obsess over things that were not helping the story move along. And that's where, as I said, my editor came in and she'd be like, it's great that you're obsessing over a comma or how a line sounds, but what about your character? What's happening in this poem? And also I would have to say my very first reader, my spouse, Paul, he was always very aware of that flow in the story, because I do think that when you're reading for a young adult audience, there has to be peaks and valleys, yes, right? Because if the emotional tension and the difficult topics are followed one after the other, it could be really overwhelming. I would even dare say that this is true for the adult reader as well. I had the outline of the poems, what each one was discussing, and because of feedback that I got, and also just looking at that list, I would realize that maybe I was presenting too many poems about the femicides together. It's just the magic of the editing process and the revising process that helped me get there. And I think with the femicides, having young adult readers in mind was that I didn't want to have graphic descriptions of dead women, just because first of my reader, but then the images, those kinds of images have been exploited in the media. So I'm not going to add to that because it's about celebrating who they were before they were murdered. Sometimes these women just become, oh, the woman who got killed. But that's not their story, not really. It was a really complex process because I did not want to add to the headlines that I just spoke about. But as I said, I got a lot of help.
Yeah, and I think it takes all that, second opinion, third opinion, fourth opinion to really be able to build out that narrative that we see in 30 Talks Weird Love. How do you think that the poetry and the verse make these subjects more accessible?
We're so focused as poets of the space that we have available. We really must choose the right words every time. And that should be true as well for fiction and paragraphs. But there is this added challenge of getting it right and choosing your words. And because each poem in a way is a scene, right? And in my book, there's no chapters. For example, I really had to make sure that each poem hit in terms of the topic, but also the character, but also the interactions with other characters. And I think that's why perhaps verse can be more digestible, even though if someone, and I have the book here, right? If someone just grabs a novel in verse and they start flipping through it, maybe there's also fear, because poetry has this bad reputation of only being for the fancy people, right? So, but at the same time, if they take the time to read novel in verse, especially for young adults, you'll see that we're not trying to exclude our readers. We're actually trying to invite them in, especially because we're so aware that each word matters. And so I'm just so honored to be part of that tradition of novels in verse. So I would say grab a book, don't be intimidated, and give the poetry a chance.
Every time the poetry unit would come along in 6th grade, me as a teacher, I did not like having to teach poetry because it was so difficult to be able to find ways that students could connect with the poems that we were, required to teach. So with a book like 30 Talks Weird Love, it's like, no, look, poetry can be really fun and it can be really accessible, especially for our bilingual children, right? Because it's a much more digestible um, way to receive information and to receive a story. That was something that I wish I could have shared more during my time in the classroom, that this doesn't have to be a really daunting, genre. And you wrote this awesome guest post for our open book blog where you shared about the different kinds of bilingual you have been. You used this really great caterpillar to cocoon to moth to monarch metaphor to describe it. Tell us about bilingualism and the role it plays for you as a storyteller, a poet, and in the book.
Thank you for having that kind appreciation of the post. I was given a lot of freedom with Lee and Low, and I had never written about this in an essay form or an article form. And I think bilingualism and how it relates to the different phases has a lot to do with shame. Growing up in the border, and this is not everyone's experience, even in the border, but I would hear, even indirectly, or even in conversations that my parents really didn't think that they were hurtful or painful or that would have an effect, is saying that if you mix languages, it meant that you weren't smart enough to speak either. You were called a pocha or pocho. And I'm glad that term is being reclaimed. And I think that we should be rebel pochos and pochas and say, this is who I am. But growing up, it was not the case. It was either speak English or speak Spanish, don't mix them. You don't want to be like those people. What does that even mean, those people? And I think there's a lack of understanding. My experience living here, when I'm both Mexican and Mexican American. In the beginning, when I was mostly Mexican, because I hadn't started living here in El Paso, I didn't understand that our Mexican American brothers and sisters, one of the reasons why some of them don't speak Spanish, it's not because they reject it. It's also because this history of the early immigrants where they were penalized or punished for actually using Spanish. So it makes a lot of sense that those grandmas, right, those moms wouldn't pass on the language because they were being protective of their children. So when my fellow Mexicans would say, oh, this Mexican American person, why are they not speaking Spanish? Well, let's have those conversations. It's not as simple as I don't want to recognize that part of me. There's systemic racism. There's a lot of things that we need to be talking about. In my case, being aware of that history, but also my own history was really important. Why was I ashamed? If it became part of my identity, even more so when I started attending school here. And it took, I think, until my early 30s, I am not 37, to say, you know what, I can pepper some words. Little by little, I started doing more and more. I think that in the book, as I said before, it is a bilingual utopia because no one is bullying anyone. And I think that in my next project, there will be something about that because you get bullied. I've heard it from my high school students then. I still hear it from college students now. Those faces just speak to this progression from shame to saying, this is who I am, and I'm not going to be ashamed. And that's where I invite readers to feel that pride in your hometown, but also your language or languages. And it doesn't have to be only Spanish and English. It could be whatever kind of combination. Language is a living thing, and it's there to serve us, not the other way around. So we continue the mezcolanza or the mix, and it's beautiful.
If anything, you've encouraged me more to be unapologetic about the Spanish that I sprinkle in my own personal use, and to see that play out in this story was really special because in my bilingual brain, I didn't think, oh, she's using Spanish. No, I just read through, and I think that's really truly special to who we are as bilingual, and then the languages and the power of languages. And so thank you for that. You teach writing at the university level. What's the main lesson you want your students to take with you after a semester in your class?
I want them to take from poetry what I think every teacher of poetry wants from elementary to high school, which is poetry is and can be for everyone. It is not only for the lucky few. The first conversation that we have in college is, tell me your real thoughts about poetry. So what are some words that come up? Boring, cryptic, pretentious. And we take the time to actually talk about why that is. And then little by little, hopefully, by sharing contemporary poetry written by different poets of color, white poets that are working in poetry now. I'm not trying to diss the great bard Shakespeare, but trying to show them that poetry can be written by someone who's not British, by someone who is just writing about home and writing a poem that tells a little story. Core value is that poetry is music. That's one of the main things. And I tell them, if you don't get anything else from this course, poetry is music. Going back to that oral tradition, read the poems out loud. The ones that you write, the ones that you read them out loud. That's how poetry got passed on from one person to the other. And I will add a third one, and I think it might be the most important one, besides poetry is and can be for everyone. Poetry is about music. I was reminded of this by Margarita Engel, who's amazing. Her body of work in novels and verse and poetry is just amazing. But she said, ask the students how they feel about a poem, period. And that is powerful, because we go into poetry thinking it has to mean something very specific and that the author is playing games with us. Sometimes it's as easy as, this poem makes me happy, feel sad. And then from there, you explore it. So it goes back to being a teenager, I guess, and being in touch with emotions. That's what poetry is about for me. Some of the lessons that I would like students and just readers to take from it.
And I think that's so important for everyone to hear, not only students, but readers. So thank you for sharing that with us. Would you be so kind as to lead us through a short poetry or writing exercise?
Yes, of course. So this is concrete poetry or shape poetry. One of the poems that you find in the book that follows this is Girl, and it's on page 159. First thing that you would do is, with a pencil, trace the shape for your poem, or like I did, use a computer. What I did, I got inspiration from the symbol that we're given, at least at birth, by doctors, saying this is female or male, right? And then after that, I wanted to explore more, right? To go beyond that. And so I went with the heart. I put them together, and then the really brilliant designers made it gel into this. Just be very mindful that whatever you choose is probably going to influence your writing. And then after that, you just start writing within the shape you traced. Because of this was going to be in a book, this is following the very usual left to right, but you can go in any direction you want. And this is also a great activity for groups. You can take turns writing a line. It's just a very flexible exercise. A lot of students at different ages have actually enjoyed it. The main thing is just to have fun and to let the writing and the shape take you where it will. Very simple, nothing complex, but I think it can lead you in really interesting places.
I will definitely have to take a shot at this and try and see what I come up with. I think this has left me inspired by poetry and verse, so I can't wait to be able to try that for myself. And I do want to share a few of the resources that we do have for 30 Talks Weird Love. We have our teacher's guide, which is available on the book page for 30 Talks Weird Love. We also have different articles, such as the open book blog guest post, the We Need Diverse Books guest post, and the El Paso Matters feature that you were in. And then we do have 2 videos, Alessandra reading the first poem of 30 Talks Weird Love, and the literary podcast with Alessandra. Wow, what a tongue twister. And once again, thank you so much for sitting down and having this conversation with us. It's such an important story and book that you've shared, and you make poetry, verse so accessible, so fun, and it allows really anyone to engage with it.
Muchas gracias. Thank you so much. I'm honored. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.